Today, we're going to build the most common Italian past tense, the Passato Prossimo, and we're going to do it piece by piece.
So the tool we need for this is called the Passato Prossimo, and you can seriously think of it like your master key for talking about the past in Italian. It is by far the tense you're going to hear and use the most in just everyday conversation.
Now, what's really cool about this tense is just how versatile it is. I mean, it covers completed actions, things that happened just once, or even stuff that happened over and over again. And here's the crucial part. It works for both the English simple past, like I ate, and the present perfect, I have eaten. So yeah, one Italian tense does the job of two in English. How do we actually build this thing? The Passato Prossimo follows this beautifully simple two-part blueprint. Let's break it down. First, you need what we call an auxiliary or a helper verb. And for what we're doing today, that's going to be avere, which means to have. Then, for the second part, you just need the past participle of your main verb. That's the bit that tells you what action actually happened. So, helper verb plus main action. That's the formula. Simple. The past participle. This is basically how we take a regular verb, like to eat or to sleep, and just switch it into its past form. Like eaten or slept. For most verbs, it's super regular and predictable. Look at this. If a verb ends in are, like mangiare, you just swap that ending for ato. If it ends in ere, like credere, it becomes uto. And for verbs ending in ire, like dormire, you guessed it, it becomes ito. It's a pattern. So mangiare becomes mangiato. Dormire becomes dormito. See? You're already halfway there. Okay, so we've got our past participle down. Now let's talk about our helper verb avere. The big question is, how do we know which verbs need avere to help them out? Well, good news. The vast majority of Italian verbs do, and there's a really simple rule to figure it out. So the rule is all based on this one concept, transitive verbs. And I know that sounds super technical, but I promise it's not. A transitive verb is just an action that does something to a thing or to a person. Think about it. If I say, I watch, you're going to ask, watch what? If I say, I meet, you'll say, meet whom? The action needs a target, an object, to make sense. And that leads us to the secret key. This is the trick. To figure out if a verb uses avere, all you have to do is ask this super simple question right after the verb. What or whom? If you can answer that question with something that makes sense, then congrats. The verb is transitive, and you need to use avere. Let's put this little trick to the test. Let's take watch. I watched, what? A movie, un film. Hey, it works. So we use avere. Ho visto un film. How about study? We studied, what? Italian, italiano. Perfect sense. So it's abbiamo studiato italiano. One more. Meet. They met whom? A friend, un amico. So we get hanno incontrato un amico. See how well that works? And here's a fun little quirk of the language, something a little weird but cool. The verb avere itself, to have, is also transitive. I mean, you have what? A problem, an idea, a car. So get this. When you put the verb to have into the past tense, it uses itself as the helper verb. So they had a problem becomes hanno avuto un problema, which literally means they have had a problem. Now it's time for the finishing touches, the stuff that makes your sentences sound even more natural. We're going to look at how to make things negative, how to ask questions, and how to add some extra detail with adverbs. Okay, making a sentence negative, honestly, it could not be easier. All you do is add one tiny little word, non, and you put it right before the helper verb. That is it. So ho mangiato becomes non ho mangiato. Nothing else in the sentence has to change. It's just so clean, so simple, and it works the same way every single time. So what about questions? Again, super straightforward. In spoken Italian, a lot of the time you can just take your statement like, hai mangiato, you ate, and just let your voice go up at the end to make it a question. Hai mangiato? Easy. Or, of course, you can just pop a question word, like che cosa, what, right at the beginning. And now for the final touch, adverbs. Words like always, never, already, yet. These are the words that add so much color and detail to what we're saying. And in the Passato Prossimo, the good news is there's just one simple rule for where these guys go. Okay, here's the rule. The adverb gets neatly tucked right in between the helper verb and the past participle. It's like the filling in a sandwich. It actually splits our two-part formula. So if you want to say, I have always had, it becomes ho sempre avuto. See? Sempre is right there in the middle. Here's another great example with mai, which means never. Now, there are two things to notice here. First, it follows the exact same placement rule. You see it right there between ho and mangiato. But second, and this is important, in Italian, mai needs that negative word non at the beginning of the sentence. So it's a kind of double negative. Non ho mai, which is how you say I have never. And that exact same rule applies to the word ancora, which means yet. Just like mai, it's only used in negative sentences. So we haven't yet read the book becomes non abbiamo ancora letto il libro. And look, there's ancora right in the middle, just where we'd expect it to be.
Okay, one last example for you with a really common adverb, già, which means already. If you want to say, I have already slept, it's ho già dormito. And again, look at that. The placement is perfectly consistent. Once you get this one rule down, you can use all of these adverbs correctly. It's that simple.
So, let's circle all the way back to the beginning. We now have all the pieces of the puzzle, right? We've got our helper verb, avere. We know how to create the past participle. We can ask questions. We can make sentences negative. And we can add all that extra detail. So, I'm going to ask you again. Che cosa hai fatto ieri? What did you do yesterday? You now have all the tools you need to build your own answer.